This video covers section 1.4, bias in studies. We're going to look at one major way that experiments can produce incorrect results, and that is bias. To take a recent example, in 2025, you had Zohran Mamdani, a Muslim immigrant socialist, going up against the heavily favored former governor of New York State, Andrew Cuomo, in the New York City mayoral race. And even though the polls strongly predicted a Cuomo victory, a strong Cuomo victory, Mamdani actually won pretty strongly by 7 points, not quite double digits, but 7 points. Very, very big, an upset. And Cuomo had been leading by a lot in just about every single poll. Why did this happen? Well, probably what happened was the polls were biased. And why is that? Well, likely what happened was the polls undersampled likely Mamdani voters and oversampled likely Cuomo voters. And in particular, how did this happen? Was this intentional? Well, probably not. There was tremendous turnout in that primary. So probably what happened was they undersampled people who normally didn't vote and maybe wound up voting for the first time. Like they undersampled first-time voters. In case you're wondering what wound up happening, pollsters corrected their mistake, maybe a little bit too much. Mamdani wound up winning the general election against Cuomo, who wound up running as an independent, but only by about 9 points. Still a very sizable victory, but not the double digits that most polls were predicting. So all of this is to show that polling can be an inexact science. It's really difficult to poll a local election, even New York City. A couple of terms. A study conducted by a procedure that produces the correct results on average, that's important because sometimes you get a bad sample, is unbiased. Unbiased studies sometimes don't get the right results. They sometimes don't produce the right results, but on average they will. Other study that, over or under samples population on average is biased. And there are other ways that a study can be biased. We're going to get into all of that. But avoiding bias can be really difficult. That's why we're looking at this section, right? Because researchers often don't know precise proportions of, I guess what I'll call, I'll just say not important. I'll say various, or no, I won't say various. I'll just say of subpopulations. In the example of polling, the number of white, black, Hispanic, Asian voters in New York City, that's actually pretty well known. But knowing their turnout rate, knowing how they're going to feel about a certain candidate, knowing maybe they've undergone an identity shift, they used to identify as Democrats, now they're Republicans or independent, etc., that's tough to know. And so pollsters do their best, but even when you do your best, these things can happen. So we're going to maximize what we can control, which in this case means understanding different types of bias. And I guess I would say, and how to avoid them. That maybe it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. Let's consider an over-the-top example. And I mean over-the-top. Hopefully you see where I'm going with this. Suppose that a pollster wants to know how you're going to vote in the 2025 mayoral election. Okay, suppose it hadn't been held today. And they ask the following questions. Did you know that Zohran Mamdani is a Muslim immigrant? Did you know crime in New York City is still above pre-pandemic levels? Did you know Andrew Cuomo plans to prioritize fighting crime if elected mayor? Okay, now with all those things in mind, how would you vote for mayor if you were given the choice today? Now, hopefully, you can see that there's just a little bit of bias in these questions, right? This is an anti-Mom Donnie question. This is an Eric Adams question. He was also running for mayor. He was the current mayor, and then was running for mayor again. And then, oh, look, we have a pro-Cuomo, right? Now that we've scared you about crime, we're going to point out that Cuomo's trying to prevent it all. So even though, if we look at the last question, that seems pretty neutral, about as neutral as it can get, we have biased you by asking these questions before, okay? And there's a term for this. We call this type of bias priming. The first 3 questions are an example of priming, right? They prime, you can use it as a verb, they prime the participant into having an opinion favoring one candidate over the other. Needless to say, the survey is biased. Okay. Now let's take a look at a cousin of priming. Suppose another set of pollsters ask the question, do you support or oppose increasing our border security, knowing that criminals likely pass through our borders? Technically not priming, because I am asking only one question. But still, I hope you can see the bias dripping from that question. This is an example of a leading question. You may have heard that term in, like, trial jargon, right? A question that leads you to the answer that they want to hear, right? The pollster is including a negative, I'll say, representation of people who cross our borders, immigrants, right? Right. This poll is biased. I hope that went without saying, but if not, there you go. It's biased. Okay. There are other kinds of bias that I'm just going to sneak in here. There is a type of bias called non-response bias. You might guess what that is. It's when you put out a survey and not enough people respond, so that you can't really get a meaningful idea of what the general public thinks. So I'll say not enough individuals respond. Making the results unrepresentative of the population. And not just unrepresentative, but unknowably unrepresentative. Like, how are they unrepresentative? Were they biased? In which direction? We don't know. Okay. Another one is self-interest bias. This one can be a little nefarious. You have to watch out for this guy. This is one where the surveyors ask questions in a way favorable to themselves. I'll get to some example of those in a sec. All right. And then last we have, and we all have to watch out for this one, we've all been victims of this, social desirability bias. Right, and this is a situation where participants respond in a certain way to avoid negative feedback. Okay. So these are all kinds of biases that we have to watch out for. Talking about non-response bias, we have something called, let me go back to green here. Non-responders are people who, well, don't respond to surveys. I'll say to a survey. Now, you're always going to get some amount of non-response. It's going to happen. But a lot of non-response can be problematic. I should say they don't respond in a study or survey. Non-response, right, we just talked about this, is the phenomenon, right, where they don't respond. And I want you to think about why bias could occur in a survey with non-response, especially intentional non-response. Pause the video, think about this for a sec. Right, and the reason is because non-responders might have opinions they just don't want to share. Opinions but aren't represented in the data. All right, so try this. All right. Now let's take a look at another kind of bias. Sampling bias, right? We were just talking about this before, right? This occurs when the, sample of a survey is, biased in some way. Right? Now, the problem with sampling bias is that it can occur from good faith attempts. It can be very difficult to sample a truly random pool of subjects. Right? So researchers spend a lot of time ensuring that their samples aren't biased, but as we've seen in polling for elections, it still sometimes happens. So try this as well. And that's what I've got for you.